intertextual cardboard experience. Three quick things before we get to the show. First off, this is being released on January 1st, 2024, so Happy New Year to everyone. Thanks to anyone joining for the first time. Thanks to anyone who's been listening throughout and is subscribed and is listening to it live. Any listening and support is appreciated, and I hope you had a great kind of like set of holidays and are ready for 2024 as well. With the note of support, we're on to quick point number 2, and that's that you may have noticed that the intro got shortened by quite a bit, and it's also going to be changing even more in the future. So the old one was just kind of shrunk down for now, and I hope to change it and tweak it a little bit more. This was due to the feedback form. So the feedback form is something I'm going to have in every episode's show notes moving forward, and it was kind of rolled out with a giveaway and had a couple winners for the giveaway, but I'm kind of taking all feedback into account, like, whether or not a change is going to be implemented or not, or just at least like played with is all really dependent. But nonetheless, if that's something that you haven't done but are interested in helping out the podcast in that way, it's going to be available, just a Google form. So I appreciate your help there. And yeah, something was just about the intro being like a little lengthy, and I wasn't necessarily sure in the first place if the whole point of the intro really made too much sense anyway. So just playing around with it. That's about it. And then quick point number 3. Speaking of kind of like growth and changes and community and everything, had a really fun opportunity being a guest speaker for the Board Game Dojo podcast. Had an end of the year like reflection cleanse type episode that was really fun to be a part of, and then I've listened to it since, and there are other podcasts and people reflecting there as well. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So definitely check that out. Eric was really kind in reaching out, and the way that information, like from me, or the sounds, the clips from me and everyone else were taken and kind of conversed with, was really neat, and I thought it was a great idea. So I was really happy to be a part of that. So without further ado, the 3 quick notes are done, and we are to a really awesome episode. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to Intertextual Cardboard Experience. Special guest today in Jon Perry, board game designer, video game designer, musician, writer, podcaster. Any other titles that I'm missing?
No. And I'd say usually I lead with game designer these days, or maybe writer, but because some of those things I don't do as much as I used to. But yeah, I'm not going to add anything.
Okay, won't add, and I definitely led designer too. I mean, that's board game focus for a conversation, but definitely diving into the other things as well. So just kind of like as an introductory question, hopefully this comes across in a straightforward enough way. But if you could kind of like chronologically look back and think about when your interest in all these different creative pursuits started, like when did you know you wanted to design board games, or when did you initially have that interest, kind of like so on and so forth. And I'm also, as like a sub-level question, kind of curious if you felt like there was any like overlaps in the timing of these interests too.
Well, I mean, part of the reason that list is kind of long, even though, I think I really focus on games these days, but I've definitely done a lot of different stuff, is because it's almost been like part of my self-concept as long as I can remember, that I just like to create things in general. So to me, the act of making, a comic book versus a game, I mean, it all feels part of the same urge that I have and have always had. So, I mean, I think the tougher thing has more been like figuring out how to prioritize my time when there are so many things I enjoy doing. Because it's at a certain point, you got to focus somewhat, right? You can't necessarily, there's not enough time in the world to be great at everything. So there's no, I mean, like if I think way, way back, I mean, I can remember like a time in like preschool when I like drew a picture of a dinosaur and like my friend was jealous and tore it up. Or like another random memory I have is like reading a story out loud that I wrote in fourth grade and people really liking it. And it's like I think I imprinted like for whatever reason early on just like that feeling of making something that somebody enjoys or is impressed by. And I don't know, I guess I'm just chasing that. So it's gone across all these different mediums over the years.
Oh, very cool. One of the things that you said kind of early on in that is, your desire to create in all of these kind of like different spaces is just tied to you and all just the fact that you like all of those things and want to create and I think like to me that's that's definitely directly tied to like a purpose of this podcast and just like seeing different creators and the things that they're interested in, but also like seeing where there are overlaps and how people choose to like balance their priorities and everything like that too. So I don't know. That speaks to me as well, I guess.
Well, this podcast, you call it intertextual cardboard experience, right? So I guess you're trying to bring in other mediums as part of the. I mean, how do you describe the pitch of this show actually? Because or what I mean, I guess I'm not supposed to be asking you questions, but like,
Oh,
where did the inspiration for this come from?
I like being asked questions until I realize that I can't answer them. Anyway, but yeah, so for me, I've kind of like I had an idea to think about this like podcast in different ways. Like the initial creation started like several years ago, and I think it was a little bit more limited in its scope. But this is actually something like I talk about like a little bit in a couple different spots, but I like to do a whole bunch of different things too, and I feel like I'm very not like necessarily just surface level in all of them, but I feel like I'm trying to, spin the plates or juggle or do that balancing act where I want to like do some creation work on my own, but I also want to see like the most recent movies or see like as many shows and kind of consume and read and play games as much as I can. So I think like the goal of this then is to primarily focus on board games, but see like where those overlaps come up. So maybe it's one of my interviews was with Alan Emmerich, and this was one of my earlier kind of like interest in board games, or as was starting to like dive in a little bit more, was seeing like a game based on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So it's not really, like new IP, like like Marvel necessarily, but it was like a literary piece and like how the game took some of those ideas. So I read the story first in order to play the game and just seeing how like my experience of playing the game was then impacted by reading it initially too. So just like having that open-endedness of connecting like a book to a game or a game to a show or whatever is just kind of like what I want to be able to have the opportunity to do if it presents itself. So
I think that all makes sense to me. And like one of the reasons I've sort of focused in on primarily games and to a sort of lesser degree writing as like my main things now is because it's so easy to sneak in other media into those things. I mean, board games, yes. I mean, especially video games, right? All of a sudden, a video game contains like every other type of art form practically, right? It's got music and graphics and all of that, writing usually. So yeah, part of the reason I've chosen games as my main pastime is because it's like there's enough intertextuality in games already to keep me from getting bored, basically.
Yeah, I get that. And oh, I feel like I have to well, not slow down because it's not like I'm creating much. I make this podcast and I toy around with some writing here and there too, but it's like just even in like consuming, it can be overwhelming too. Just like with the plethora of options of what you could play. Like, I mean, if you just chose that you wanted to focus on like playing video games, I mean, one person could play a video game for the rest of their life if they really wanted to.
Yeah, I mean that's a constant battle, right? Just feeling there's always, I mean, it's comforting in a way to know that, like, I don't really worry about ever getting bored in that sense. There's like so much stuff out there to like read and play and listen to and so on. But yeah, there's so much stuff always falling by the wayside. I mean, I'm pretty good about playing a lot of board games, not as great about playing video games. There's a lot I haven't played. My reading is like fallen off lately. I feel like it's always a struggle to keep up with everything.
Yeah, and there's like trends too. Like sometimes maybe like the past couple years are like board game heavy. The couple years before that were like more video game heavy. So the ability, like you said, to have the options and just kind of like pick and choose as you go and not even think about boredom is a positive thing to me at least.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've gotten comfortable with the idea of like phases, right? Yeah, my life has these phases where it's like I'll just be really into movies for a while, and that's okay. I'm not gonna read much during that period. I'll get back to books later. I trust that'll happen.
Yeah, and yeah, books are nice too. I feel like sometimes rediving into a book is easier. Sometimes it's really tough, and then you're like, I just didn't time diving getting back into this one in the right like time frame. But books can be like a longer time investment than sitting down for a couple hours, but it all adds up one way or the other.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Well, this there's something I was thinking about too. So, obviously talked a little bit about like all the different things that you have done. So I'm curious, with like board game design, video game design, probably specifically, do you feel like there's something else that you maybe at some point in time pursued in order to really like help facilitate the development of your board games or the development of your video games? So I guess kind of like quickly for me, as I was starting the podcast, I found it really, well, kind of funny that like, oh, like to have a podcast, it's probably nice having an aesthetically pleasing logo and having some sound design skills and those were like two things that I had no skill in like whatsoever. So I had a friend do the logo and I think it's really great, but like just kind of toying around with different sound studios after the fact and watching YouTube videos is still something I'm doing, but it's not like it's something I'm good at. So I guess again, the question is, what's something that like you feel would be a really cool skill to have that would help facilitate your game design?
I mean, I thought you were maybe asking, what's something else that I worked on that fed back into games at
Ooh.
first, but is that not quite what you're asking? It sounds like I maybe I don't quite
Hmm.
know that.
How about, yeah, answer that question. I like that one.
Okay. That's where I thought you were first going, and then I thought I misunderstood the ending of that. Oh gosh. Well, I don't even know if I created that question, I guess myself, and now I don't have a great answer for that. Um, I mean, for me, I'd say that like games are really my first love, actually. So it's like that's why that question maybe doesn't quite make sense, right? It's more like games have fed into everything else.
Hmm.
Um, like I want to say that just playing Legend of Zelda, okay, like for the NES, for whatever reason as a child, just like it got me to start reading because I saw a book in the bookstore that was called Water of Life. So I made my mom buy it because that was a thing in Zelda. It got me to start like drawing because I would like draw my own maps. You know, it got me to learn how to program because I wanted to make video games someday. Um, I feel like it helped me get into music because I just like that old video game music was like something that I really enjoyed as a kid. I would like tape it off the TV, you know, which just sounds dumb now. Um, so I feel like I've, you know, and that's why like I focus on games now. Like I feel like I spent, you know, most of my like 20s, like a whole decade basically doing all kinds of different stuff all over the place and not really doing much of games. And then I sort of feel like I've come back to games, and that was always like my original love. Again, I don't know if this has anything to do with the original question you were trying to ask, which I do want to understand if you want to try to help me with that.
No, okay. So, well, first off, I like your response a lot. The only reason I didn't like phrase the question in the way that you were kind of answering it was because I kind of had a question later about that, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
So my my question, I guess, then was like, I'll throw some examples out there. So like, do you feel like what is something that like you wish you like had as something in your back pocket to like help aid or assist you with your design? Like, so say hypothetically,
Oh,
like if you wanted to do the art for your games or whatever. I guess that was just kind of the
yeah,
question.
yeah. Totally. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I yeah, I wish art was is actually a good one. I mean, I wish I had a little developed my illustration skill more over the years. Like I used to draw a lot, and that's one again, you can't do everything, right? Like I keep coming back to. So I mean, my drawing is one of many things that I at some point mostly stopped doing. I think I had some skill in it, but you know, have not developed it whatsoever. And certainly, you know, if I could do what Ryan Lockett does, for example, and illustrate all my games, that would be amazing. So that's, I mean, that's a good one. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff. I mean, there's some math that's useful, but I feel like I've mostly picked up what I needed along the way. Um, so yeah, I mean, probably illustration is like the number one factor in like board games and games where I'm like, I feel like, you know, I'm only okay at that, and like I'm always gonna probably feel like I need to work with someone else to fill in that gap. So
Neat. Yeah, so okay, potentially, I mean, we'll talk about a little bit about board game design stuff in a bit. But so I guess just like a thought based on that is, so say if you're working on just like a prototype of your game, do you do any of the early like illustration, or do you just kind of like throw stuff in as like symbols, or I guess I'm just curious how that works for you then.
yeah, it's really for me much more about graphic design at the prototype stage. And graphic design is another thing that's extremely useful. I feel a little more confident in that area, although I probably would benefit from like, you know, doing a deep dive on that for, you know, 6 months or something. I guess so maybe that's another good answer. But yeah, my prototypes, I usually don't even, I mean, these days it's, you can get art online, you can use AI generated art if you just want to put something on, you know, a card for a prototype. I tend to not even bother with that. I just try to get like really crisp, clear graphic design. I find that's kind of what I like most in games anyways. I mean, not that I don't like illustration, but um I really, really appreciate like sharpness and clarity in board games. You know, like I mean, I guess just as an example, like the way like a classic deck of cards looks to me is just beautiful. That aesthetic, it's actually quite simple, right? I mean, this often there's like gorgeous like art on there too, but it's like it's flat colors and it's clear and like you know exactly what every card is immediately. So that's usually more what I'm striving for in a prototype.
Nice, very cool. That makes sense. And again, that was just kind of a off the cuff type of question too. All right, so that's kind of like some introductory stuff, and I was gonna, so I tried to like structure these episodes in a way, and I was gonna just like tell you at this point in time, so the prank or the joke isn't happening. So I kind of got like 5 sections, but I was going to call this podcast 50 and say I have 50 things that I want to talk about.
Oh no.
But no, it's not that. I literally have it on my screen with the 0 with a strike through. So it's podcast 5.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah, okay.
we're chunked into 5, so I think it'll be more manageable than 50. And we'll get to the whole beast that is later, because I'm so intrigued. I know that you talked about it previously with Dan a little bit, but I've looked at the site and I've looked into the game more, and I don't know. I'm definitely in love, so I'll ask some questions. That's the second to last topic, though. That's 4 or 5.
Well, let me just say I'm happy to not end up involved in another project with 50 parts, because I love the one that I am working on, which we'll get to later, but a second one, just even the idea of that would be frightening to me.
Yeah, so I gotta call you back next week. We have to talk about the next 5 things, and then it's like 10 more weeks. But
Right. And pretty soon this podcast won't release until 2030.
that would be an artistic experiment of sorts, at the very least. I'm not sure if it'd be worth it, but it'd be something. All right. So kind of, I just want to touch on some of the other things that you've worked on out of curiosity. And you mentioned your comic graphic novel, and I don't know like a ton about it, but poking around on your site, it looks like you did a podcast that was like a companion piece of sorts for it. So I guess just to me, like I'm curious, how the graphic novel came to be, how it grew, and then, like how that in turn made you want to research all these different things that like the podcast then explored too. Because I don't know, I think it's super interesting, and like the sci-fi stuff, especially with UFO 50, like later on, I don't know. It just feels like they have a lot of links, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on all of
that. So the comic book podcast pairing thing has happened twice now, actually. So I'm actually not even totally sure which ones you're asking about, so I'll just explain them both.
Okay.
I have a comic book that is out now. You can buy it on Amazon, called Let Go, and that's a sci-fi graphic novel about you can think of it as like an update to the Jetsons for like our like modern understanding of technology in the future, because it's a nuclear family struggling to get by in a near future. And in some ways it's relevant now, like there's a ton of AI and automation and stuff happening. And when we were making that book, and in a long time in the lead up to it, my co-writer and I were hosting a podcast called Review the Future, where we did reviews of science fiction and also nonfiction books that dealt with future predictions. And we also just discussed topics where we would just sort of speculate wildly about, future technologies and how they might impact, our culture. And so like that podcast is now over. I mean, there's like back episodes floating around that you can find. And then so but they were only like companions in the sense that the podcast was kind of research for the eventual graphic novel, right? Because we had to world build for the graphic novel, which means we had to answer this question of like, okay, what is it actually going to be like for this family in the near future? And so we got so interested chatting about that topic that we ended up just basically recording our chats as a podcast. And then at the end of that podcast, we released that graphic novel. The new thing is I have a graphic novel that I'm working on, again with the same co-writer, Ted Cupper, that's not done. Still got a ways to go, called Constellation. And that one has a companion podcast in a much more literal sense, right? We actually just basically recorded ourselves like coming up with the concept, like coming up with the world, working out the details of the world building, eventually like reading drafts of the script to each other. So it's a much less audience serving podcast, and much, it's for a very small niche of people, I think, that would ever, listen to this newer podcast. It's almost more of like a document of just our process, which has been quite helpful for ourselves, just to remember things that we've talked about. And I think it's just been an interesting experiment. But like, whereas like the prior podcast, we had an actual audience of people that wanted to hear us. It was not a big audience by any stretch, but like, we were actually being hosts and trying to talk about interesting stuff. This newer podcast is, I think, it's literally just us recording our writing meetings, basically.
I mean, both like processes sound really neat, though. I mean, like you said with the first one, that once the review the future was done, that's when the graphic novel is released, right?
I mean, those things happened pretty close together. I mean, it wasn't like we released the graphic novel and then immediately shut the podcast down. But it didn't go on too much longer after that point.
All right, neat. No, I think that's fun, and it's definitely something that I mean, I want to look into more. So hearing like your thoughts on it and like how it came to be has me intrigued to like check out the graphic novel and then see like all the things that you did research in order to make that happen. I think that's literally what I'm looking for. So
now, I mean, we're on record on these episodes, talking about the future and making predictions, and some of these episodes, I mean, probably aired 10 years ago at this point. So I'm sure there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't hold up. Just gonna say. There's probably I think there's some stuff maybe that does hold up, but I mean, it's going to be a real mixed bag. Just a warning if anyone goes into those archives.
Hey, well, I mean, then there is that bit too where you can like see the speculative thoughts that you had, compare it to present day, and see like which crazier things have happened. Because I'm sure there are things that have happened that are crazier that you wouldn't predict, or crazy things that haven't happened. And I don't know. There's that like, I don't know, almost not like revisionist lens, but that look back at the very least that adds an extra element to it too.
Oh yeah, no, and I'm always doing a little bit of that, revising my expectations. But I mean, it's just, I mean, I think part of the reason that we started doing that podcast too is just, I mean, we both felt a bit future shocked, like just the way that things change and the pace of things. And I definitely, I mean, that feeling has not gone away. I mean, we're living in a crazy time, where we have these like, high profile labor disputes over, whether they're going to, automate all of the extras out of movies and stuff. So, I mean, there's, stuff that you wouldn't have imagined like 10 years ago. So.
Yeah, no, that's wild. So does like one more question on that before moving on. So does the newer podcast still talk about things like that then, or is it more linked to the creation?
Yeah, the newer podcast like really is just about the making of the graphic novel. So unless if that sound, I mean, again, I think it's a very narrow people that are going to be interested, and if that's you, then great. But I wouldn't recommend it to most people. I think maybe, here and there we slip into other topics though.
All right. Oh, very cool. And thanks for sharing that. Yeah, like when I was looking and clicking around, I mean, I think you can get to the review the future through the link to the Constellation like page. I think, clicking on the Constellation like thumbnail on your site takes you to the site Review the Future, and then it has like all those episodes for Constellation and then all the episodes for Review the Future. So
yeah, and I think we used the same, I believe we just used the same feed and just changed the name.
Maybe that's where like some of my confusion comes in, but now it makes like complete sense, and I like that process. So
yeah, I mean, it's fun to evolve a podcast, right? As long as you're, sometimes you might lose some of your audience in the process. I think we probably did, but things got to change.
Hey, you may have lost some, but the key people that held on are still listening. You might get new people too. So it's like you said, it's a different evolution. Cool. Like I said, very, very interesting. Then I kind of just have one question now about your music, and then I'll kind of revisit that just a little bit later in a particular way. I'm definitely like a music fan. I have zero musical skill or knowledge, but people that create music and actually like understand music kind of blow me away. So I'm just curious as to like what are some of the types of music that you enjoy, create, and or like I know you said you don't really make a ton of music now, but perhaps would be interested in still creating.
Yeah, so I mean, the dumb answer is I like all kinds of music, right? But actually, I mean, I guess I can narrow that a little bit. I mean, certainly the music that I tried to make most recently was like, you know, stuff that was identifiable as pop music in the sense that it had like a lead vocal melody that you could follow, but that pushed it in a weirder direction, both with the production and the sound textures, and in some cases maybe with the chord changes and stuff. And that I think tends to be like my favorite genre of music, when I can find it, like the like comfort and like familiarity of like a pop melody, but like against a very like weird and challenging backdrop. um I mean, I don't make as much music right now just because I'm so busy with the game stuff. Where I see myself getting back into it most likely is probably composing stuff for games. I think I mean, I have like, I mean, someday that my giant project, which you've alluded to, UFO 50, which is a video game I've been working on for years and years now for good reason. It's very large. Someday that will be done, and I want to do something quick and small, maybe even solo, and it would be I really like am looking forward to the day that I just like do that and maybe make all my own music for it, as soundtrack music, which I don't have, I don't have a ton of experience doing soundtrack music, but it seems like a fun challenge.
Oh, nice. Now that you mention it, we'll knock out all music things kind of out of the way then too, because that was like a thought that I had later on. So you mentioned that for UFO 50. So have you done any like kind of sound or soundtrack work for that at all?
I have not, and I was, that wasn't always going to be the case. Originally I was going to do some for it, but the thing is, um, we have a very, very accomplished like composer and sound engineer on the team, Eric Cirque. I always get his last name wrong, but and like that project also requires like a very specific like style of music composition, because I mean, without getting too much into what the project is, right? We're making these games in a retro style, so the music has to adhere to these like specifications, and Eric sort of created those and had like his whole software suite of tools to do it. And he certainly invited me to like make some tracks for it. And in the end, I just felt like there's so much to do on this project. That what, he had that handled, right? Because for me to make a track was probably going to take 10x the time that it takes him to make a track, and he's just so good at it. Plus, like someone's got to fill in the gaps on the programming and design and just like various logistical stuff for the project. So I just sort of slotted myself into that area that I felt was less covered. So that's a long answer to say no, but I definitely look forward to making music for the next game I work on.
Yeah, awesome. No, honestly, like the way that no came about answered future questions that I had, and sounds like a fun thing to be able to like keep bringing all of your like passions and endeavors into like one, like a solo project in the future. So that's really great.
Yeah, I mean, when you're on a project this long, it's like it's really fun, but yeah, it's fun to daydream also about what life looks like after it.
Well, it seems like you have some things set up that you'll be able to keep yourself busy for a long time, even after this long time is up.
For sure.
Neat. Cool. All right. So that that little chunk about like the podcast and music is set. And moving into board games, I have a very quick question. And this is kind of well, I don't want to borrow from the conversation that you had with with Dan, because I mean I mentioned that already. So this is just really quick question. About a year ago now, or a year ago or so, you had the interview with Dan Thoreau about lane battlers and then about Marvel Snap. So the short question is, do you still play it at all?
I don't. I really I think I might have slightly revisited it after our podcast, but not really. So yeah, I mean I still think it's a cool game. I get why people get addicted to it, but you know, I mean, I just honestly, I'm just wary of the time suck, right? Like I just like I need to stay clear of that game.
Super fair. I just had to ask. I am about as admittedly an addict as one can find. I literally, as of last night though, I swore that once the season is done, that I'm done. I'm going to try to completely cold stop.
Well, good luck.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I understand what you mean about the time sink with it, but it's a ridiculous game. I guess that's like my short thoughts on it. But I ask because I'm ready to quit, and I've probably said that before though.
Well, maybe you find yourself a Marvel Snap sponsor or something to keep you honest.
Yeah, maybe I'll intertextually bring in some Marvel people and start streaming and get big that way and throw all this stuff.
Sorry, I meant I was making like an AA joke. Maybe.
Oh. I thought you meant like a literal.
No, or you could just get a sponsor and go even more hardcore into your addiction. Either way, you might as well go deep or quit. Oh
my gosh, no, it's well we'll leave that behind. But nonetheless, okay, that's kind of like transitioning into just like your game designs, because part of that conversation was about air, land, and sea, which I don't have any sort of love-hate relationship with that game. I just absolutely love it. I think it's just fantastic, obviously. But when I reached out to you, I was just kind of thinking about how air, land, and sea worked as a lane battler. Scapegoat in the way that it approaches like social deductions. It takes, I mean, your games take like genres, and my stupid simplification of the way that I like your games is that they like distill the genre but then add like a little bit of a twist. So I guess my one initial question then is to just share like what your general design philosophy is, what types of games like stick out to you. How do you gravitate towards making or going from air, land, and sea to Scapegoat to Spots to, or well, Time Barons was way before, so we'll do some reverse time engineering. But like I guess just kind of like your thoughts on how your games come to you and what you're trying to accomplish like with them.
So they start in different ways. Like I think the probably Scapegoat and Air, Land, and Sea have the most similar beginning, in the sense that I was obsessed with some mechanism and the experience that goes with that mechanism as well. In the case of Air, Land, and Sea, it was like that feeling you get in poker, right, of just like trying to figure out like, is this where I go all in or is this where I drop out, and trying to capture that in like a different sort of game that had it also a little bit more moving parts and like surface level strategy. I mean, poker has tons of strategy, but like there's like sort of a hobby board game kind of strategy with special powers and stuff that Air, Land, and Sea has that I wanted to see combined with that poker feeling. Or like in the case of Scapegoat, it's just this sort of reverse like social deduction idea where like I kept the example I kept thinking of was like do androids dream of electric sleep or Blade Runner, right, where like someone might be like a lot of like Philip K. Dick stuff. Someone might be like a robot and not know they're a robot. So like this idea that like there's something about you that everyone else knows about you, but you don't know, which to me felt like a flip of normal social deduction. I became really obsessed with that. So both those games, like I started from this like very specific thing and just kept hammering on it until I finally got it. It was like, it's always a process making any of these games. I mean, the story behind like, say, like Time Barons or Spots is like, it started in a different place, but I think my process is sort of always the same in some ways. And I think like what you said, I like that you said that, because I mean, it is definitely what I'm striving for. Like you said, distilled, and you said like there's a hook. So like the hook part is just, I am conscious of the other genres that are out there. I mean, we talked earlier about how it's like frustrating. You can't, always like play all the games out there or read all the books, but like I'm pretty up to date on board games.
Hello?
That's something I pride. Oh, sorry, did I break out? Or cut
Yeah.
out?
You just like pause for like 2 seconds.
Okay. I don't know exactly where, but I usually have like a pretty good sense when I'm working on a game of like what other games exist in that genre. And if I don't, I go out and I play them immediately. I do my research. So I don't think I'd like even keep working on a game if I didn't think there was like something different about it. I mean, I'm always asking that question. And I think I don't think this is like terribly unusual either. Like I think most designers, if they're not doing that, they should be, but I think most of them are. And then the distilled part is just like, I basically like, this is where I think I differ from some designers that I've met, is like I really like all parts of the design process, including that part at the end where you're just polishing and balancing and tweaking. And like I've worked with some other designers where I feel like at a certain point they're like, okay, this is good enough. I want to move on to the next. The video is breaking up again.
Yeah.
I stopped because it seemed like we were cutting out.
Okay.
I didn't chop out the last couple internet blips, but we did a little reset here and it worked. And now we're resuming.
All right, where was I?
Design process towards the end, other designers.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think there are some designers that probably feel like they're done sooner than I feel like I'm done. And I don't think they're actually even wrong. Like, I think probably there is diminishing returns, and the right move often is to just move on to the next project when something's good enough. But I just, for whatever reason, I really enjoy just endlessly tweaking and stuff. So I will just keep doing that. And I also really hate fiddliness in games. So I'll just keep compressing and compressing and compressing until I like can't make it smaller. And I really enjoy that process. And like, so, I mean, I don't know if that's what you're feeling when you play my games. I hope that's certainly what I'm striving for. Is that like, they're sort of very focused, on like one core vision, without having like too much extraneous stuff.
Yeah, I think that to me definitely comes across, and I was hoping, the only thing I was hoping was that my language actually like made sense to you. So it seems like they kind of match up a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. And like, I mean, I increasingly think of game design like not as like some kind of craft that like you get better at. I mean, there's like some theory that's helpful for game design for sure, and you can get a little bit better at like predicting whether some like set of rules will work or not. Like, so I don't want to say that doesn't exist at all, but I increasingly just feel like a lot of it's just a process, and it's just a grind, and it's just like at the end of the day, it's about like knowing where you want to go and then just having the grit to just keep cranking through versions. And like, as long as you know where you're trying to go, and as long as you can judge whether the new version got you closer there than the old version, if you just keep doing that, And again, luckily I enjoy that part, so it's like doesn't feel too much like work. Like, eventually it gets better and better and you get something, but it does feel like a struggle sometimes. I mean, almost every game is like a challenge.
Very, very cool. So I guess the only kind of follow-up question I have is just like maybe where your current headspace is at. Like you said, you're very diligent in making sure that you're kind of like up on like modern games and trying out different things, different games that are like doing or that implement different mechanisms or are part of different genres. So is there currently, like, you said with Airline and Sea, you're thinking about like poker. With Scapegoat, you're thinking about social deduction. Is there any like mechanism or genre that's currently been the one that you've been thinking about the most lately? And maybe, wow, maybe you can't talk about it. Maybe it's a secret design or something like that. But just in general, I guess.
Well, yeah, there's stuff I can talk about for sure. I mean, I'm pretty far along on a game that's in like the betting and racing genre that like includes games like, Camel Up and Ready Set Bet and a few other things. And I've been trying to do a game in this genre for honestly for like quite a while. There's even a video game that I made a long time ago with Derek Yu that's like in this genre called Quibble Racing. Um, so I've almost cracked it. Like I'm like that design is very far along and to the point that it, if everything comes together, it might be out next year at some point. Trying to think like as far as stuff that's more like aspirational that like I'm not actually working on, like I've never done or I certainly haven't like published like an actual just like anything that's like a Euro game really. Like I would like to do that genre. I mean, it's like a super crowded market, so it's actually like a really fun question to ask like what can you do there that's actually different? I tend to like the ones, in sort of like the terraforming Mars camp that are very card driven and have like a lot of variety. So I could see something doing something in that space. So I don't know. Those are my quick answers.
Perfect. They're perfect quick answers. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the former, that racing betting design, and in whatever hypothetical future scene, like your version of a Euro. Like it's going to happen, and I'll play it. And I'm sure there's plenty of other people who are really looking forward to that too.
Yeah, well, that one, that particularly that second one. I mean, there's no is pretty far out maybe, but that racing game should happen soon.
Well, again, it exists. I mean, like it's in the universe for whoever hears this, they're gonna know, and they're gonna hold you to it.
Fair enough. It's far enough along that I feel okay with that.
Okay, very very cool. Neat. Well, I'm curious, and now we're kind of on like the second to last bit, just checking in on UFO 50, and like to me, I'm curious, kind of like especially just transitioning from. I mean, obviously you've had a lifelong interest in video games and board games, but I'm curious to like hear your thoughts on the way that like maybe your board game design has influenced your video game design. So like the games that you've been working on for the project, and like if are there any overlaps that you see in them? Like I don't know. That's not a question. That's just kind of like me
No, but
asking you to brainstorm.
well, no, I mean, I have answered to that because I mean, absolutely, like board games influence what I'm doing for UFO 50 like a lot. I mean, I had to design a lot of games for UFO 50. I have a decent chunk of the 50 that I was responsible for coming up with, and I'm like I said, I'm pretty up on board games more so than I am on video games. So a lot of my reference points are from board games more than from video games. And I thought about like, oh, is this a problem? Maybe I should correct this and play more video games. But then I just decided to lean into it. Like, maybe I'll come up with something a little different because I'm sort of taking stuff from one platform into, or not platform, but like medium into another. And I also think it's sort of a fun. It's been fun to do because we are making games in a retro style as if they came out in the 80s. And it's pretty strange to draw upon like modern board game mechanisms and put them in there. And it, on one level, it makes sense because there's nothing that modern board games that are doing that couldn't have been done in the 80s, right? It just the culturally those things weren't being done. Like the craft of game design hadn't evolved at that point to, include some of these modern mechanisms like deck building, for example. But like, there's no technological obstacle, right? So it's sort of fun to make these like primitive technological games that have these very modern mechanisms in it, almost as if this company was like way ahead of its time somehow.
Nice. No, that makes like a ton of general sense. So kind of tying back to a previous question then too. I'm curious. Can you hear me?
I can. I just my camera is completely out of focus for whatever reason, but it's a podcast, so nobody cares at home.
Yeah, I was gonna say no one needs to see me right now. I won't complain about that. But no, so kind of like connecting back a few things. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but obviously just in the type of like media that you're interested in, it seems like, sci-fi is something that you're heavily engaged with through your writing and the podcast too. And well, it's UFO 50. So I'm just curious how you feel like your exploration into those topics, real life science research and sci-fi, have impacted your thought process for this game.
It's interesting. The name UFO 50, gosh, I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to say that I kind of now, it's been so long, I kind of forget the exact conversation that got us to that name. But it's not, it's not super literal, right? Like these aren't like a collection of sci-fi games. There is a so the company, right? I keep referencing the company, so I don't know if I've made this clear, but there's like a fictional company as part of sort of our framing story for UFO 50 that made these 50 games, right? We're sort of presenting them as if we didn't make them, but this fictional company did. And that company is called UFO Soft, and they have like a little pink UFO as their logo. And there's actually a series of 3 games, like a trilogy of games in the collection. I think there's even a 4th, like sort of like side one too, that are all starring both this UFO. Actually, there's even more than I think about. There might be as many as 5 games that are either starring the UFO or like the pilot of the UFO. So it's definitely like, it's like a big thread, and I think there's a reason why the collection is called that. But the games, of course, like span all different genres. With 50 games, I think if they were only sci-fi, that'd be a little bit limiting. Although there's probably there's a fair amount of like just sort of planet hopping space opera type stuff, and I think we all on the team like really enjoy that stuff. So it's definitely an influence. And I don't know if it ties like that strongly into like the like sci-fi books that I'm a fan of, but I mean, all of that stuff probably influences me somewhat.
Yeah, seems super fair. That one. I mean, I wasn't saying that I was predicting your answer because I didn't, but yeah, what you're saying makes a ton of sense. I was just curious, like to see if there was anything, and you mentioned just like those inherent influences of reading things, watching things, and thinking about them in that way. Definitely did, but maybe not like super explicitly. Maybe.
No, I think that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to like put words into your mouth. Yeah, I disagree with that. I have a question. Okay, so this is more of a like a for me question. because it's based on a conversation that I was having with a friend recently. And I'm like, you mentioned the graphic, the graphics, like they're a bunch of 8-bit games. And I think, I like video games. I definitely don't play as many as like I used to, but I think some of the things that I have come back to are maybe not like the triple A produced games that have like the crazy graphics or anything like that. I mean, I sometimes play them and I like them, but I do think that one of the games, I think Eric, your co-designer, was the creator or had a big role in Downwell.
Well, there's two people. I mean, Eric did the music for
Oh, okay.
Downwell, but also the programmer and designer of Downwell also is involved with our team.
Nice.
Not as much. I mean, this has been a multi-year project, and so for years now he hasn't been involved. But there's at least one game in the collection that he basically made entirely himself, and that's Ojiro Fumoto.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's making more sense. But I mean, like games like that. I mean, I love Downwell. I love anything that is like going back to these different styles. But one thing that I've seen a little bit, maybe in different kind of like Metroidvanias more so, is like the going back to like a 8 or 16-bit. I don't know anything about graphic creation or anything like that, but I feel like that hasn't been like necessarily a huge trend, but there are a lot of these games that will still use that graphical like style or just use those graphics, but then also kind of do things to make them look more modern, so have that 80s feel, but then also do little like layers or twists to make them be like, okay, like this feels 80s, but it also feels like it was still made like more recently. Is what I'm saying making sense?
Oh yeah. Oh no, definitely, definitely. And I think we're probably doing a lot less of that. Or at least we're trying. I mean, I feel pretty good about where we've landed with the look and feel of our games. Like I think they're if you got like a game historian who knows all about these old systems, I mean, they're going to be able to poke holes in what we've done for sure. But all in all, I think it all looks and feels pretty authentic. And partly that's because like we're legitimately trying to tell, like a sort of framing story here, right? I mean, you can think of it as like, if someone was making like a period movie, right? You want to get the costumes right, so like we're really trying to get that stuff correct in a way that like there's a lot of games that have a retro style because it's an appealing look, but they don't have any, they're not interested in like actually making it, appear to be from that time. They just kind of like want to draw upon those vibes and maybe update them. And so I think that's totally valid and really cool as well. I do think hopefully what we're doing will stand out in being like a little more like restraint, right? In terms of like, we're not, we're probably the most modern twist that we have, which is a little bit anachronistic, is that we have a 16:9 aspect ratio. So it's just part of the backstory of the company that they did this. They chose this really strange aspect ratio for the era. So I mean, like we've sort of like explained that part, but like that's probably the weirdest thing about what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, I mean, the first time I heard about this was probably in that interview, and as soon as I did, it like immediately shot up on my like, this is something that I'm 100% going to play and know that I'll love to. So I'm just glad that I got to hear more from you about it too.
Are you talking about from the Dan Thoreau?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wasn't. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to like bring in some people who are like maybe, I don't know if you consider yourself like a more of a board game fan than a video game fan or equal or whatever, but like I mean, I think there's going to be a lot in UFO 50 for people that play a lot of board games to enjoy.
Yeah, I think probably I've played a lot more board games than I have video games the past few years, but I I play like my fair share still. But I mean, honestly, like, some of the kind of retro-y feeling ones and things that I've mentioned, or, you know, like Downwell, I've played a lot of that game, and just things like that. I'll fall into playing those a lot. So I'm excited.
Yeah, Downwell is an awesome game.
Yeah, it's crazy. I got like decent at it for a minute, and then I lost like all my skills. So when I returned, I was so used to be able to making like those really like good combinations of just landing on all like the baddies, so you'd have like a no touch run as like long as you possibly can, and then I'd try to recreate that and like die in the early levels later. I'm like,
Oh
no.
yeah. That game. I mean, it's not. Yeah, that game and games in that genre. It's not like riding a bike. You don't
No.
just you lose your skills pretty fast if you
Oh,
don't play.
I definitely did. So I kind of well, I want to open this up. Like, do you have like any other thoughts on UFO 50, like how it's going? Any just kind of like final thoughts to wrap up this particular topic?
Sure. It's go first of all, it's I mean, I should say it's going well, right? I mean, if you go to it's a little embarrassing because if you go to the website for it, there's a trailer and it says coming in 2018, I think, which is like, okay. But so I mean, that was over optimistic. Turns out it takes a while to make 50 games, but all those games are done pretty much at this point. And the kinds of things I'm doing now, personally, I mean, everybody on the team is working on different stuff, but I'm working on things like the backstory, the details of the backstory of the company and like the menu system that ties everything together. So, I mean, the kinds of things that we're doing now feel like final stage type stuff. And, you know, it's a pretty big feat just to get all 50 games into one build at once, but that's like kind of the next thing on my plate. And so like early next year, we should be testing like the whole, finished beta. So if that gives you some sense of where we are. No release date though.
No, no, like yeah, 2018's release date.
Right. I mean, exactly. Like we're not going to give another one at this point because, we already shot ourselves in the foot once. Not going to
No.
shoot ourselves in the other one.
Hey, but no, like I think that just adds to, the story of the creation of the game, and not to me, like not in a bad way. I think it's good that there has been so much time and design poured in by how many different people are involved in it.
Six. There's six of us.
Yeah,
Although, I mean, there will be more as we move into other steps. We're gonna need translators and stuff. So
yeah.
testers.
I know there's 6 on the website page, so I just didn't want to like leave out people perhaps in that
No,
number.
that part at least, unlike the release date, that part is still accurate. It's funny. I had this epiphany the other day that like, we've created this fictional company that has this fictional timeline over which they made these games. That now like we've nearly spent as much. I think it's nearly identical. The amount of time that our actual team has spent making these games is nearly the same as the fictional team. So I guess in that sense, it's realistic.
I honestly, that's funny too, because like I was writing like a story, like I don't know if you want to call it a novel. I'm not sure if everyone's writing a novel, maybe more of a novella, but I placed it in 2029. And I guess if it's finished by 2029, I can't even remember like the last time I've put words in it, but who knows? Maybe I did put a lot of words into it at one point in time. Let's just put it that way. Maybe that's the way art's supposed to be made.
I mean, that's always a tricky thing with sci-fi, right? Like if you do you actually put the date in there? Like with our graphic novel, we decided not to. But I mean, it can be fun to do that. And, I mean, I still read tons of science fiction books that are like, set in the year 2000 or whatever. And they're still, it doesn't really hurt it. It's still fun to
Yeah,
read those.
yeah. Maybe I should, in hindsight now, or now not hindsight, but in in the. I should delete the date. Who knows? We'll see. That's beside the point.
Depends what you're trying to do with it, of course.
Yeah. No, most definitely. Awesome. Okay. Very cool. So just kind of to final like wrap up questions. As we've talked about like a whole bunch of different things, you mentioned your interest in a whole bunch of different types of games and everything like that, books, the shows and movies you gravitate towards. Is there any text, so anything that you have watched, listened to, read, played, or anything like that that has stuck out to you lately that's been stuck in your mind?
Okay, yeah, I'll do something like super recent and then I'll tie it to something older. How
Awesome.
about? So like have you watched Scavenger's Reign yet?
This is funny because one of my a very recent guest, the last actual guest that I had published was Eric Slauson,
Mm-hmm.
and that was something that Eric had mentioned. So
I mean, I think it's pretty obvious why it's appealing maybe to game designers, and or just like nerds in general.
so I've
um,
I've watched the first episode, and I am with watching that first episode. I'm definitely set to finish it. So it's not like I watched it and I'm done. I'm very intrigued. Like I was all for it. So
I mean, it's basically like catnip for me. I feel like I had daydreamed something in my head as like what my ideal show would be, and it's pretty close to what Scavenger's Reign turned out to be. Um, and I think the part about it that I want to highlight is like, you know, it's an ecosystem, right? It's like a fake ecosystem. Um, it's hard to know like how much the writers have like really worked out the details, but it's very evocative and you see these interesting like life cycles and stuff and how things interact. And like, again, games are systems. So it's like I think there's a real strong connection there. I mean, I think it's like, and I guess you asked me earlier about like a genre of game I'd like to work on. This isn't really a genre so much as a theme, but like this idea of like a fantasy ecosystem has always like really interested me. Um, and it's the reason I really enjoy like nature stuff that's just totally like nonfiction, like Planet Earth or whatever. But like I told you, I was gonna make an older reference. Like the other thing that gave me the same feeling as Scavenger's Reign, which is like totally different, is there's an old series of comics called Bean World. Um, totally different. And I don't know if anybody else but me would like make this connection or not, but like so that's like a game with that, or sorry, that's a book. It's hard when we're jumping mediums so often, but that's like a graphic novel with like a very simple, sort of like flat, almost stick figure-y drawing aesthetic, um, about these like weird bean characters, but they sort of like exist in this like flat, like 2D ecosystem, um, that's like, made up and like, this sort of like interesting. It's just a very evocative to me of like how things can interact and like I very much like want to make a game that plays with that, like it's very interesting to me how like, like the life cycle of one creature, might depend upon some like interaction with another creature, which is how that creature gets its food, which is how some other creature, gets like something else that it needs and how that's all tied together. I'm not sure exactly the best way to turn that into a game. I think it might work better as a video game than a board game, possibly. But yeah, I mean that's kind of an answer. Funny, it's funny that someone else said that, but I'm not too surprised.
yeah, well, I mean, now that you brought this design idea out too, whether it is a board or video game, I'm gonna hold you to that as well.
Oh, great. Okay.
I'm just
Just,
kidding.
just making commitments left and right.
No, I'm joking, but no, that does sound like like you said, just taking some of the evocativeness of both of those ideas and thinking about them. That's super great. And if it were to happen in the future, I would be very excited about it. Okay.
Um, There's one other thing too, like there's something called Flatland,
Hmm.
which is like an old like novella that like describes how like a fictional like two-dimensional world would work. That's like, flat like on a sheet of paper, flat, like um and like that is like and then there's like another book called the Planiverse that kind of takes the same idea and like really goes into more detail about like the biology of like flat two-dimensional creatures and stuff. And like that also is in the sort of cluster of things that like floats around in my head when I think about this stuff. In part because like most of these mediums are flat, right? Like the way you like I mean, I guess actually that's one thing that's unique about a board game is a board game is not flat, right? But like most things that you engage with on screens or on paper, which is a lot of mediums, are inherently flat. So like the idea of like um, designing an ecosystem that is itself flat, it's like kind of brings like the medium that you're enjoying the experience on like closer to the thing itself. Now I'm kind of rambling here, but I remembered that just
Oh,
popped into my head.
no, so is this like an older novella?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That the so Flatland is really old. It's like from 1884 and it's satirical of the era. Like I feel like it's not it's like it's making like a point that's not super relevant to today maybe um about like the culture in which it was made. But it's still pretty interesting from this lens of like, they've created that from world building, I guess, as a perspective.
Yeah. And well, I mean, just I kind of feel stupid for, as far as I know, not having this be something that I like knew about, but obviously seems like super popular. My deep dive Wikipedia is showing that it's popped up in a lot of like TV, other literature, and pop culture in different ways too. So it's like oft alluded to.
I think it's still kind of a deep cut. I mean, I don't,
Okay.
it's not like I have known about this for years or something. Like, I think I probably learned about it maybe 5 years ago tops. So, I mean, it's not weird if you haven't heard of this at all.
Okay. Well, it's
Um, and
funny.
and then
Just
Planiverse is the other one that came out in 1984. That's definitely inspired by Flatland.
okay. Cool. Yeah. No, I'll definitely look into this more because I mean, a lot of the in pop culture, like, you know, illusions or everything like that, where it's kind of showing where this novel has like popped up, are in other texts that I have like read or watched too. So I think it's funny that it's like the novel appears in Interstellar or something like that. So
Oh, interesting. I
yeah.
guess I'm not even aware of how much it's been referenced then.
I,
So this is all new
again,
to me
this
too.
this is my very uh, in-depth Wikipedia search is showing me all this information. So, but oh no, I that's like very interesting, and the way that you presented it and like thinking about crossing it over with like board game design or video game design and having these things that are, you know, 2D representing 3D, and I don't know. You're blowing my brain right now, and I just got to look into it more.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's something there. I don't. Yeah, it's another thing to actually make whatever this vague cluster of ideas is into a design. But I think the things that make like that are inspiring for games tend to be like things that are systemic, right? Like systems. So that's why like yeah, ecosystems and worlds and stuff like that are like particularly inspirational when it comes to games.
Nice. Okay. Well, I got just because you brought that up, I'm gonna ask you like one more question now. So, I guess the one thing I'm wondering then too is because you know you're thinking about like these different texts and how they would inspire you know, different games. So I guess like as a designer, how often are you like watching a show like Scavenger's Reign or reading these novellas and thinking about those texts directly in regard to game design, or how often do you just kind of like try to check out of that brain space?
Oh yeah, that's funny. I think I can check out of it. I mean, I think it's more like, something like Scavenger's Reign like hits you pretty hard with that kind of vibe. And so like it definitely got me thinking about games. But yeah, I mean, it's not like every experience I have or thing I look at, I'm like turning into a game in my head. Um it's interesting, like I don't like, I think there are, obviously like people in a lot of mediums like make stuff based on their own life and experience. And I think even game designers do that. I don't feel like I do that. I mean, I'm sure like there's always the subconscious influences, but um yeah, I feel like yeah. So I don't know. I guess that answers your question as best I can.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so literally final thoughts. You talked about like the current state of UFO 50. You talked about your racing betting game. Is there anything else that people should be like looking out for from you coming up?
Um I have I mean, I am working on other stuff. I mean, those are the big ones. Also,
Mhm.
like there's the graphic novel
Oh, yes.
Constellation, which I didn't really give the pitch for, but that is something that is being worked on and will eventually come out. That one I think I also, wouldn't venture a release date for. And I'm working on another board game that I think has a very good chance of becoming reality. It's a card game. Vaguely in the CCG space. In fact, you know what? I'll just kind of like say a little bit about it because I don't think it really matters. I mean, like I don't know. Like I don't know if there's like some big like needs to be some big cloud of secrecy around these things. I it's a game where like every card would be unique. That's ever printed. So it's like you could think of like key forges and then think of like the next logical step past that. Um, and so that's farther from reality than the racing game, but I can see a pretty clear path forward for that game.
Well, if it wasn't clear, anything that you have any involvement in, I was intrigued by looking into some of that other stuff that I was less familiar with in your graphic novels. I'm intrigued about those, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing these projects keep coming into existence, and I'll play them. So
Uh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I hope you keep doing this podcast.
yeah, thank
Um,
thank you. And it's funny too because you earlier on, like you asked that question back where you said, what was like my inspiration or what am I trying to do here? That's kind of the question, I guess. I'm not sure if I'm
something
rewording
like
it,
that. Yeah.
something like that. But I mean, like honestly, like this, like these types of conversations, and especially just like exploring the way in which you like design all these different things and like, how they have those overlaps. I mean, this is kind of one of the answers to that question too. So I'm very like excited by this conversation. So
Oh yeah, this has been a very fun conversation.
awesome. Well, I'll definitely uh, let you go and say thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me on here and making this happen.
All right, no, I really appreciate it, and I look forward to just being in communication and engaged with your works in the future too.
Great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to actually seeing other people enjoy some of these things that I've been laboring on in private for a long time.
I like Yeah, man. Like another callback. You mentioned that was one of your inspirations is just seeing the things that you make and having people like enjoy them too, starting all the way back to your early stories and drawings and all that. So it's definitely is your reality, and more of that's going to be happening. So
Looking forward to it.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. This has been great.
Intertextual Cardboard Experience, the most eclectic podcast about board games and any other text that they connect to. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time here. Any further support, such as sharing the show with friends, following the page's socials in the episode description, writing a review, filling out the feedback form, or doing anything else you can think of is greatly appreciated. Keep playing, watching, reading, listening, experiencing.